Hello again, I'm Sarah Seibert, Managing Editor of GovCIO Media and Research, and we'll be talking about best practices for enhancing cyber resilience, the importance of partnerships, and the roles emerging tech is playing in threat detection. So with me we have Matt Berry, the Chief Operating Officer at HP Federal, Jimmy Hall, CIO with the Bureau of Intelligence and Research at the State Department, and Christina Walter, Director of the Cybersecurity Collaboration Center at NSA. Thank you all for joining me today. So you all bring a unique perspective to the table when we talk about what it means to be quote unquote resilient, and the stakes continue to rise as we see adversaries evolve. So throughout the conversation, we'll dive into how your organizations are combating these threats, baking security into tech solutions, and developing partnerships to strengthen security postures. So to start, I'll ask all of you a question about how you're taking a proactive approach to security to combat some of these emerging threats we're seeing. Matt, would you like to start?
Sure. First of all, thank you. It's great to be here this afternoon, and thanks for everyone for hanging in there today. A couple thoughts come to mind. One is, I think it's really important that in industry we build security in, secure by design, and those are easy words to say, but when you think about, in our case, edge IT, whether it's print or compute or collaboration equipment, a lot of people think of security as something that is a checklist item after the fact, and it can't be. Mm-hmm. It's got to be an intrinsic part of the design process. So that's a big part of what we need to remain focused on. When you think about a printer, and I kind of hope you don't, I don't, unless I'm out of toner or ink when I use one, but it has to be a utility experience in terms of security. It has to be something that just works. And so that is both a focus for us and it's a responsibility. So secure by design, that's one. And the other thing I'd say is partnership across other industry partners and public sector, super important in that no one company can do what needs to happen. So whether it's our involvement in things like the Trusted Compute Group for 30 years or working with NIST on various special publications, 800 series, et cetera, those are all really, really important ways that we're not trying to get it right by ourselves, but we're working together to help raise the waterline across the industry, and I think that's super important. So those are a couple of things.
Yeah, so thanks to you all as well for joining us. And I'd like to pull the string a little on what Matt talked about. But before I do that, let me just talk a little bit about my roles at the State Department, because I think the context is key here. And not only am I the CIO for the Bureau of Intelligence and Research, the INR as it's known. So we've been doing intelligence for 79 years at the State Department. So state intelligence is a thing. Secondly, my second hat is Director of the Technology and Innovation Office. And then thirdly, I'm the Chief Information Officer for Intelligence for the department. In that, my focus is completely on TSSCI and above. Dr. Kelly Fletcher is the CIO for the department, and her focuses are on basically unclassed and secret level activities. And so the TSSCI and above is completely under my umbrella, and I think that's just an important context to level set everyone on moving forward. But as Matt said, security by design is a concept that we subscribe to as well. I don't think you're going to hear many new concepts from us up here except validation and verification of things that we all know as a community is important. So I would say security at each phase is also important when you say security by design. And then I look at it from a perspective of organizational security. There's some things inside of my organization that we need to do and be doing on a daily basis, such as scanning and such as monitoring and doing those things that we need to do. And then thirdly, as Matt talked about, collaboration opportunities such as today is going to be important and is important to what we do in terms of security. And so that's how we think we're looking at combating emerging technologies. And it's a day-to-day conversation. It's a day-to-day fight. And just when we think we've achieved where we need to achieve, well, we got work to do when we wake up the next day. And so that's where we are. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on that. Is this working? Can you hear me? Yes? Okay, we're going to go with this until somebody hands me. I also want to thank you for giving me a full couch to myself. I feel like that was good, being on this panel and sitting on the end. I think when we talk about emerging threats and technologies, obviously from the National Security Agency, we are tracking foreign threats every day, day in and day out. So everything that that Jimmy and Matt talked about are foundational to what we see the adversaries taking advantage of. And so looking at it from that perspective, the whole concept of secure by design is so critical, because what do we see nation-state actors doing? We see them take advantage of seams between government and industry. We see them take advantage of trust relationships between companies and their suppliers. We see them abuse trust relationships that are designed for usability of our telecommunications and critical infrastructure sector. And all of that is good identity management, access management, network segmentation. Those are the things that are going to get after these really sophisticated threats that are coming at us with these adversaries that have a lot of capabilities and resources backing them. But I'd say second to that is the emerging technology space is just making everything much more complicated. When we talk about artificial intelligence, it's really useful for all of us. We can use ChatGPT to write a keynote speech, but it's also really useful for our adversaries to create really realistic phishing emails or videos that are hard to detect from the human eye, and making it really much harder for humans to identify things that are malicious, and that human error is always part of it, which is why those products need to be secure and be countering the kind of human element of ways that emerging technologies like AI can counter that. I'll say the other threat that we're constantly focused on is that post-quantum era, and we know our adversaries are interested in building a cryptographically relevant quantum computer that will break today's encryption that we all rely on day in and day out. And so being ready for that and the roadmap ahead of how all organizations, the government and industry, are thinking about how do we address this problem when we get to a point where technology can really disrupt our day-to-day lives and the technology and the capabilities that we depend upon.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I feel like adversaries has become almost as much of a buzzword, or that vague, veiled term, as like artificial intelligence. So I want to drill down into that a bit. We've seen the evolution of advanced persistent threats like Volt Typhoon and Salt Typhoon. So Christina, I'll stick with you. Like, what was the call to action from those adversaries?
Yeah, I think this better. Thank you. Sorry. I think the typhoons, the pandas, whatever you want to call them, depending on who names them, are something that we're all thinking about. And when we look at across the board, we've always talked about the threats coming from China and Russia, Iran, North Korea, but really the China threat is the pacing challenge that we think about day in and day out. And we think about it because we've seen such a change in the behavior. So I like to break apart Volt Typhoon and Salt Typhoon because I think they are slightly different in nature. While both looking at U.S. critical infrastructure and looking at taking advantage of seams and vulnerabilities in that, Volt Typhoon has really been focused on non-intelligence targets. What do we mean by that? Water systems, pipelines, electric grids, looking at places that there is no intelligence value, except that they are incredibly key to the day-to-day life of Americans. And so what is concerning to us about the Volt Typhoon threat is, one, the sophistication with which they are getting in, so leveraging zero-day vulnerabilities that we've seen, that we've known about after the fact. But two, maintaining persistence in a way that the cybersecurity industry was not tracking 2 or 3 years ago. And so when you think of China cyber program, you think of exploitation, looking for intellectual property, mass exfil of documents. That was not what we saw when it came to Volt Typhoon. Volt Typhoon was using zero-day vulnerabilities, getting in, identifying legitimate credentials, and maintaining persistence in networks that had no value other than potential disruption. That should concern everybody a little bit. That means that if there's something that happens and they want to be able to disrupt day-to-day lives, they potentially could do that. And so I think the entire cybersecurity community and our focus at NSA was getting that information out with FBI and CISA and all of our interagency colleagues. Five Eyes partners played a critical role to get that out to the cybersecurity community so that that small water company is not hunting on their own. They barely have an IT person in many cases. And so we need to expose these campaigns so that the broader community can identify it. Salt Typhoon, different in that going after high-value intelligence targets, so targeting telecommunications sector to identify, where folks are thinking and trying to give China a strategic advantage in that space. But that particular compromise, when you look at it, was leveraging the very nature with which our telecommunications were built on, which is usability and speed. Things that slow that down are security, encryption, making your messages go by slower. So they were taking advantage of previously known vulnerabilities that the community have been talking about in devices, but it's really expensive to replace all of that equipment. And then they were also abusing the very trust relationships that telecommunications have. So in order for me to be able to make a phone call across the country, that routes through several providers who have agreements with each other to make sure that call goes through fast. That's really a huge attack vector that we hadn't considered before. And so to Matt's point, that requires an upskilling and security across the entire sector, because the weakest link, the regional telco or the smaller one that has less resources, that's being used as attack vector. So the sophistication is much different, and our ability to respond really requires industry and government to work together to out the campaigns and then get the entire community hunting for them.
Right, and Matt, as we talk about the evolution of these threats, how can agencies and organizations bake security into solutions to secure some of these systems that we're talking about?
Yeah, it's a great question. Three things come to mind. One is, and I would say there's a distribution of maturity, but this one's pretty much checked. Having a solid governance framework in place. Across the government, we see a range of things, but by and large, if you think about at the enterprise and the organizational level, having your baseline inventory, doing some risk assessment, what's the target profile, and then at an operational system level, having that recursive loop of action planning, remediation, and then feeding back into what is the risk tolerance that's satisfactory given changes internally and externally. We see that in place. Mm-hmm. The piece that I think is really under-indexed, the opportunity, is there's a ton of places where at the edge, zero trust is not fully deployed. And I get it. There's a lot of agencies where unlimited budget's not a reality, staffing concerns, et cetera. You can't keep adding horse blankets, if you will. But I think we find that there's an opportunity, frankly, for industry to do a better job of educating on the value proposition of things that we're already doing, mm-hmm. and to serve up innovation as opportunities to explore. And I'll just maybe give a few examples. One's not HP, not to do a commercial for my friends at Microsoft, but it's very relevant. Windows 11, everyone's on their way. If you're not, October 14th should be a date you become familiar with. But that the highlight for me is knowing that PCs that are deployed on Windows 11 in a modern management motion, meaning Intune, for example, 62% less likely to suffer a cyber intrusion. Most people don't know that. They think, well, we've got work to do. This is something we need to go do. 10 to 11, okay. But that's a step function change in security posture for an organization. So it's really important that we can articulate that kind of a value as we engage in those programs. A couple examples from within our four walls. We have capability around firmware resilience. What do I mean by that? When you boot up a laptop, a whole ton of code spools up before your operating system ever comes online. And if there's a persistent threat, a rootkit malware that's below the OS, you can wipe your machine as many times as you want. It's going to come right back. In our case, we have a security controller chip. It's on the motherboard, and it compares. So when that machine comes to life, it'll compare. If the BIOS code doesn't comport with that gold master copy, it reverts back and it boots up a clean copy of the PC. That's incredibly powerful. And while I love geeking out on the technology, it's powerful because it's built in. It just works. It doesn't take user intervention. You don't need teams of people to do stuff. It's there. Another example I'll give quickly is, and probably my favorite, is something we call SureClick. And I'm sure none of you can relate, but I am very capable of clicking on something I shouldn't, opening up an email attachment that I shouldn't perhaps. You can have all the great cyber training you want in the world, and we should continue to do that, but you're not going to reduce that to zero. And when I or someone else clicks on something, it is a perfect illustration for me of zero trust in inverting that and basically just thinking of anything as a potential threat, and therefore you're not worried about it. Why? Because people can click on that link, they can open up that attachment, it opens up in a micro VM container, a bubble, they can do whatever they need to do, and they X out, it goes away. Even if it was infected, it can't transfer to the host and traverse the network. what's fascinating for me in my chair is that we can harvest billions of data points and look at the attack vector, what the bad actors were trying to do, use AI in the cloud for TTP analysis, threat analysis, and figure out and harvest insights that we publish out on a quarterly basis. You can find that online for sure. But also as an input into our next generation of security products. And so that's another active avenue for us.
Right, that's exciting. And Jimmy, as we talk about these solutions and combating them, what role do partnerships play in that?
Yeah, so obviously a big role because we're here today.
Yeah.
If I could just go back to Matt and Katrina's points about our environment. And so I didn't mention up front, but so State Department becomes a target in a lot of cases because we're in 270 locations plus, right? That's 190 different countries and at least 150 different languages. So think about the telco conversations and the typhoon targets, and think about when you say clicking on a document. It's our business in diplomacy to click on these documents. It's our business to talk and negotiate with our adversaries in the sense that they're our allies, right? And so we don't know, but we do know, right? And so, but we still have to talk to them. We still have to work through documents, and we have to work through various forms of social media talking to these partners. And so we become a soft target. And so that's something that I can't stress enough on this particular crowd and the teamwork and the interagency work that's required to keep us all safe and secure. And I would just like folks to look at it from that perspective and say, well, why is State Department having issues with cyber? Well, let's think about it, 270 locations, right? And so part of our success, a big part of our success is going to be our partnerships here. I'm here today because I truly believe in collaboration and industry partnership. We talked earlier about, Katrina mentioned and Matt mentioned trust. We talked earlier, how do we get to trust? We get to trust in the forums like this, and we get to the point where we realize we're all in it together. And I often say, our relationships have to go beyond a transactional relationship, right? It really has to be a partnership. It has to be something that we're in together. And once we acknowledge that we're in this together, then the better off we'll be, the sooner we will get where we need to be. I used to work for a boss who would watch the Super Bowl. This is when I was in a non-intelligence community job, and there would be some piece of IT equipment that's unveiled during the Super Bowl, and he would come to work on Monday morning, and he would say, I want that, right? Without the security aspects of it. And so I want that as well, and I want you all to want it. And so we need to deliver timely, but by the same token, we need to step our way through and ensure that we're not delivering a product that's vulnerable or makes us more vulnerable, right? And so our collaboration, events like today, is important. And then going forward, I try and personally have an engagement once or twice a month with our industry partners in person, so I can just find out what's going on and find out what's in the world and ensure we stay current with emerging technologies. So that's how I look at our collaboration partnerships and what's important to us.
Right.
Yeah, I think I'd add from our perspective, so the National Security Agency only stood up the Cybersecurity Collaboration Center about 5 years ago now, and it was really in recognition that 90% of U.S. infrastructure, critical infrastructure, is owned and operated by industry. We have great perspectives on what foreign adversaries are doing in foreign space. We have no visibility at all once they come into domestic space, but industry are the ones who have the networks that are being targeted day in and day out. And so we recognized that we needed to be talking so that we could fully understand the threat. The second part of that is that we would sometimes see an intent to target of an industry partner through our foreign intelligence aperture, and we would have to give what we call a hairline, an unclassified blurb that we would give to a third party, one of our interagency partners, generally FBI and CISA, and they would come back to us and say, hey, that was really frustrating to industry to get a really unclear, vague sentence from you that we passed that didn't say anything. And so we said, yeah, we understand that. And so we recognized that a conversation became really important for us to understand if what we were seeing from a foreign space matched up with what industry was seeing happening on their network. So that was really the vision for why we established the Cybersecurity Collaboration Center. 5 years ago, we had one partner. We were focused on the defense industrial base. We had no low-side capabilities at the National Security Agency because everything was top secret. Over the last 4 years, we're up to 1,500 partners now, and that is really not by accident. That was recognizing the value of the conversations. And so we work with the big defense contractors, the cybersecurity companies, the technology providers, so that we can track nation-state threats together. When we talk about the typhoons, that was a seam that the Chinese cyber program was taking advantage of. They use U.S. infrastructure and they compromise devices at, my parents' house and at local businesses and universities, or the printers that are sitting in the shops, and then they use those as hot points to obfuscate their activities. What we found over the last 4 years is that when we can work together with cloud providers and internet service providers, we can build out these giant obfuscation networks that the Chinese cyber program is using to target the U.S., and then we can disrupt them. With partners like FBI and U.S. Cyber Command, we can take down those networks to stop them from being able to target. That's all based off of shared knowledge that we learn when we partner together, and that's foundational to really everything we've done. And we've realized that maybe what we knew was classified and sensitive in the way we knew it, but frankly, industry knew it as well because it was happening to them. And so we've really worked over the last several years to get as much out of classified channels as we can to get out to where it's actionable. So net defenders can truly understand, here's the techniques that are used, here's us jointly developing detection techniques so that we can find it together and essentially hunting side by side.
Right, it's really cool to watch just the sheer speed over the past few years and how we've responded to some of these threats. So Matt, as we talk about the future, and I'm going to say it, AI, and other emerging tech tools, but what role do some of those emerging technologies play in security?
Well, it's there's a ton. I know we've heard a lot today on the defender side and the offense attack side. Gartner published a report not long ago. It talked about 4 application classes at the edge. One of them is security in terms of AI, and different use cases around biometrics, around continuous behavioral monitoring, around identity confirmation. Those kinds of things are interesting, but the link I want to make is the latest intelligent modern devices that are getting rolled out in the industry, AI PCs, have NPUs, neural processing units. And what's interesting about that is the local models that can take on, for example, those security applications, get offloaded from the CPU and run on that NPU. The worker has full productivity, the experience that they've had, but now they have this enriched set of security capabilities that up to this point would have bogged down the machine, that classic trade-off, right? So I think we're on the cusp of seeing this expansion in terms of capabilities at the edge through AI, and I'll maybe just point to a couple others since the example of printers came up. Back to the point I made about just shouldn't have to think about it. Printers do continuous monitoring. I should speak for our printers, but it's not uncommon in the industry now. But we use AI to look for network traffic. If a printer starts an aberrant call out on a port and it's trying to phone home, we can identify that immediately and it can be managed and remedied. Those are the kinds of capabilities that we can lean on with AI. And then to state the obvious example, for security analysts that are just absolutely underwater with the sheer volume of things coming in, we believe strongly that AI can provide an incredible filtering mechanism and help people hunt and focus their energy in a lot more focused manner.
Right. And Christina, as we talk about the AI, how is the AI Security Center protecting this emerging tech as you implement it?
Yeah, I think to talk about, to pile on to Matt's point, I think there's always the conversation of, is AI better for offense or defense in cyber, and who's going to win in that battle? And I think we look at, to your point, hunting on looking for very sophisticated actors who can blend into the operating system. AI will be a huge help for that, but there's a lot of risks associated with it. I mentioned already, making phishing emails even better, making attack vectors even better, scanning for vulnerabilities. It really puts all of those attack vectors on steroids for adversaries. And so we stood up the AI Security Center within the Collaboration Center about 1.5 years ago now. And it was really in recognizing that industry plays a huge role in artificial intelligence. They're moving much faster than the government has ever moved in the past. And so how do we take our years of research into artificial intelligence, how we've used it in the intelligence community, lessons we've learned on how to make sure that it's telling you the right thing, that it's doing the right thing, and how do we bring those experts alongside industries? And so our focus is on detecting the threats to USAI from our foreign adversaries, really useful intellectual property on their networks if they can get in and take them, but also threats from AI towards our national security systems, our defense industrial base. Second, operationalizing that intelligence. So we're partnered with the large frontier companies to make sure that when we see their platform being targeted or abused, we can share it with them. We can help them understand the ways with which actors would abuse it so that they can build in those security protocols advanced. And then the last one is really the long game of how do we mitigate threats in the future? How do we work with the relevant international standards organizations so that security is built in and in partnership with NIST, and we're not letting our foreign adversaries influence standards for their own technology benefit, which we have seen before, and we are securing it ahead of time.
Right, and Jimmy, when we talk about AI, there's a lot of, investing. There's not an unlimited budget. You have to, choose the right solution for the right problem. So how are you balancing federal funding with innovation to modernize some of the dated infrastructure and stay competitive in the national security space?
Sure. Balancing is probably a tough word, right? From my chair, first and foremost, we prioritize, right? And you have to do that, and you have to keep things simple. And hey, here's exactly what we're after. Secondly, and we talked about this before in this forum for sure, is just the partnership that we build here. And then we pool those resources that we talked about. We pool the expertise, and we pool the collective knowledge base, that's important to our success. And so I will continue to do that. Out the prioritization, then the collaboration with industry, which we're doing today. And then thirdly, we look for those places where there's other initiatives that we can leverage either from our interagency partners or leverage from our industry partners, because some of the lessons learned, I should not have to learn on the intelligence side of things. We don't do a lot of AI on the intelligence side of things just because we haven't found solutions that work across the board, but we have stuck our toes in the water on the intelligence side when it comes to AI, and we're making progress daily from that aspect. But if you come back to the basic tenets of what we all need to do, it starts with prioritization, then it starts with, then it moves to pooling of those resources and pooling of expertise, which is very important. But it's not resident in State Department's intelligence, all the expertise. It's definitely not resident in the State Department writ large, but collectively together, that's going to enable us to stay balanced. And I think that being aware of our environments, and just like we are aware of our environment and we're aware of our financial situations, so is our adversaries. And so we got to take those steps to block that, right? So if I can read it, someone else can read it, and probably someone who's looking to do nefarious activities can probably read it and know that there's maybe an opportunity for us to step in behind the scenes and then get inside of our networks, and then we're all up the creek and we're doomed. So. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'll stick with you for the next question, but I'd like all of your input. So as you're building out some of these strategies, how are you measuring success of them, and what are some of the milestones that you're reaching for throughout the journey?
Okay, yeah, so success measurements for me are some of the things, the tools that we use on a day-to-day basis, whether it's metrics, whether it's KPI, whether it's other things that we look at. Obviously, I've laid out a list of priorities, a scorecard of such, if you will, that I'm able to grade myself against. I think it would be foolish of me to sit here and say, well, I haven't been attacked today, so therefore I'm successful, right? So I don't use that as a metric, but I definitely want to measure myself against those priorities that we've set up front, and how we measure ourselves against those priorities. And then I want to come back and look at my overall, what my boss's boss has asked me to do, our mission first. And so for us, that's intelligence dissemination, right? And are we able to do that? Are we able to provide the intelligence that we need to those diplomats that I talked about that spread it out in the numerous countries in different languages and what have you? And then secondly, I look at it, how do we manage risk? Right? And so risk is something that's tough to measure, but so you look and say, I'm managing risk towards the TSSCI network, particularly in my case. But what does that mean, right? Does that equate to layered defense? That equates to scanning and monitoring? Does that equate to meetings with industry partners, right? And so that's how I look at it. And then lastly, I am focused on pretty much safeguarding our data. Safeguarding our data as we issue it out to diplomats, as we issue our data and information to senior policymakers. Are we protecting those assets, and we protecting that information? If we're not able to do that, then maybe I don't go down that road. And so sometimes measurement for me is not taking an action, but waiting until we can better situate ourselves to deliver the information that we need to deliver.
I think I'd add on that, it's so hard in cyber to measure something not happening. And I have a lot of our industry partners talk to us about that. Like, Christina, I didn't have anything happen, so my board wants to cut my budget because they think surely everything's great and I don't need that. So can you tell us the threats so that we can, justify our budget? So I think we all want to look at, what are the measures that show we're doing a good job. And so for us, we look at, we break out performance and effectiveness. So on the performance side, number of partners, how many are sharing with us, what information are we getting, that doesn't really tell us a whole lot. When we talk about, we offer cybersecurity services out to defense contractors, so small businesses in the defense industrial base who essentially are providing support to DoD but don't have huge resource portfolios to defend against nation-state attacks. So DNS filtering, attack surface management, internal pen testing is something that we offer for free that DoD funded. And so those give us great metrics. We've blocked 4 billion malicious domains for the 1,500 company enrolled. Of course, my team always tells me, that's not a good news story. That just means they're being attacked more. But those blocks mean that it wasn't successful. We do a lot of measures on, days to patch. So we find that businesses in our program patch critical vulnerabilities within 33 days when the industry average is over 100. Great metric. In the last quarter, we've mitigated 20,000 vulnerabilities that we've tipped to companies that they've taken action because we were able to prioritize. So those are all ways with which we can measure that what we're doing matters. But I think on the more effectiveness side, our focus is how do we take our intelligence and we make it most actionable, which happens with industry. When we can partner with an endpoint detection company who has 2 billion endpoints globally, and they build detections for a piece of malware we shared with them, that is really getting to scale. And so for us, we have the benefit of having a signals intelligence aperture where we can see frustration on the adversary side. So when we talk about effectiveness, we try to get out a lot of public cybersecurity advisories. We want to out the activity that we see actors doing. We see that really frustrate them in their conversations later. We see them be frustrated when a Western cybersecurity company is blocking their malware that they spent a lot of time developing. So our goal is to really require them to pay for more things because we're outing their capabilities. So when they have to rebuild cyber capabilities because we've outed them publicly, or we've shared them with our international partners, or we've leveraged our partnership with State Department to get them out for these global campaigns, that's a really good day for us. It's more of a narrative than a metric, but it's how we try to show that what we're doing is having that impact because we can see it be frustrating to our adversaries.
Yeah, definitely. I'm going to have to pick your brain when we're making some of these cyber stat graphics for the next event.
I would love to do that with you.
And Matt, what are some of the ways you're measuring success?
Yeah, first of all, great comments. And I love narrative versus metrics because I do think of it a little bit differently in terms of what are the operational milestones or maybe catalysts that need to happen to drive structural change. And we've talked about a few examples today, Win 10 or Win 11 transition, for example. You touched on quantum. For us, I talked to some people and it's like, yeah, that's science fiction or that's someday. It's actually not. We're shipping gear today that's going to be in the installed fleet when that event occurs. And we need to make sure that we're doing a good job of educating. And when we come out with value prop claims like, well, now we're shipping laptops or PCs and printers that are quantum resistant, what does that mean? And just taking people through an understanding of, yep, classic encryption still there, but in a post-quantum cryptographic world, we've got to have this different approach, different algorithms in place, and make sure people understand it and why it's important to start thinking about it now. And I really have to applaud NSA and NIST and other partners in really driving the work, the spade work around developing algorithms and honing in on different technical approaches because we pick that up and then drive it through our innovation process. So I would say in the short term for, say, this year, those are some of the kinds of catalysts I'm looking at. And then longer term, if there's a scoreboard in the sky, some of the success that industry writ large has done in reducing the attack surface by having some of these capabilities, zero trust capabilities, from kernel to cloud. We have to keep building that out and more of it so that it truly operates in an integrated fashion. And I think the more that industry can come together and do that for our agency partners, I think we're all going to be living in a different world at some point. So That would be my thought.
Thank you. It's really interesting to watch how this evolves, but also the response to it. I feel like it's constantly changing and we're evolving with it. So I appreciate all of the work that all three of you are doing in this space, and it was great to learn more about some of your priorities, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.